My name is Mehindikula Surya Nancy Leia Dilhani Wickremasinghe. That's not my life story. That's not my address. That's my name. And Dil comes from my first full name, Dilhani, which of course means blue-haired lesbian. Just kidding. Dil actually means heart. Imagine living in a world that was inclusive, equal, and compassionate. One that all residents could live a fuller and more authentic life. Hands up if you'd like to live in this world. Very good. Most of you do. Okay. I'm sure that if I asked this question from people from around the world, I would get a resounding yes, please. But why is it that the world that we live in today is so far from being inclusive, equal, or compassionate? Looking at the world today, so much heartache. Climate change, the humanitarian crisis, conflict, civil unrest, human trafficking, gender inequality, sexual violence, child abuse, discrimination towards the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and intersex community, homelessness, suicide. Reading the news today is depressing for most of us. More than ever before, the global community is at crossroads, and there is a collective awakening that we need to act now if you want to change the direction that we're heading in. And the only way we can do this is by speaking out and not being afraid to challenge the current social and political system. But why is speaking out so difficult? And why do so many people feel they can't? What if our ability to speak out was directly linked to the quality of our mental health? It is my belief that the solution to all, if not most of the problems in the world, lies within us. And it all begins with our mental health. I've come across many descriptions for mental health, both as a journalist and also as a mental health service provider. And the one that resonates with me the most is our ability to direct ourselves independently of the culture and the environment that we live in. Often when you talk about mental health, we often frame the conversation around the absence of a mental illness, instead of framing it around what does good mental health look like? And what can a person achieve if they had good or even excellent mental health? What if I was to ask you, what does good mental health look like? I'm sure that most of you would actually would find it easier to describe what poor mental health is. For example, I know I'm physically healthy when I can kick a ball and run around the park with my kids. But I know I wouldn't be able to run a marathon or climb a mountain because I haven't trained for that. So what do we need to do from a mental health point of view to get ourselves to the point where not only do we live a fuller life and contribute to our environment, but also are able to speak out and challenge the system and collectively spark social change? When I look back in my life, the quality of my mental health greatly dictated on whether I was able to speak out when I experienced injustice. I started experiencing mental health problems when I was 13. My parents' marriage was in crisis. In a last-ditch attempt to save their marriage, they became Jehovah's Witnesses. And we moved from Sri Lanka to Italy. Understandably, I fell behind in my studies, and they decided that I would attend classes with a local retired maths teacher. I knew from the start there was something wrong about this man. He was just too handsy. That evening I went home and I told my mother, and her immediate response was, "No one we know would ever do a thing like that." She shut me down. And sadly, my instincts were right. He was a sexual predator, and he sexually abused me for the next few years. My first sexual experience was at the hands of a 70-year-old man. I remained silent. I failed my junior cert, my O-levels. I got expelled from school. I joined the family business, and I found myself back in Italy in the summer of 1987. I was 16 years old. Madonna's song, Express Yourself, was in the charts, and I fell in love for the first time in my life. And it was with another Jehovah's Witness girl. I enjoyed every minute of that affair, even though I knew it would have disastrous consequences. I was right. Sure enough, I was back in Sri Lanka that September, and my parents found out of the lesbian affair. And nothing could prepare me for what would happen next. They tried desperately to cure me of the gay through Bible bashing and conversion therapy. And after weeks, they realized they failed. So my father called me an abomination, advised me to kill myself, and then threw me out on the streets. I had no money, I had no education, no family support. I was 17 years old and homeless. I remained silent. I managed to get myself back on my feet thanks to my friends and the women I was dating at the time. One woman introduced me to the world of radio, and I knew straight away that this is what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a journalist. Incredibly, I landed a job in Sri Lankan radio, and it was amazing. But it only lasted 6 months, because the moment I was open about my sexuality, they fired me. I remained silent. So like so many lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people from around the world, I was forced to emigrate in the search of a country where I could be open and live an authentic life. So at the age of 21, I immigrated from Sri Lanka. I first moved to Bahrain, where I worked as a flight attendant. In the event of an emergency, your emergency exits are over there. Once a flight attendant, always a flight attendant. And at the age of 25, June 2000, I moved to Ireland. My arrival in Dublin serendipitously coincided with Dublin Gay Pride. So between 24 hours of stepping foot on Irish soil, I found myself marching and dancing down O'Connell Street, singing, "It's Raining Men!" The irony of it all. I'll never forget that day for as long as I live. It was like Ireland took me under her wing. And she said to me, "Never mind the past. You're here now, and we like you just the way you are." So like many migrants, I started from the very bottom. I started washing pots and pans in a hotel. And then a year later, I started working as a receptionist. And 6 years later, I found myself working as a recruitment consultant in a recruitment agency. And the company I worked for actually applied for a work permit for me. And I was so grateful to them. But despite being senior management, they didn't put my picture up on their website or on any of their promotional material because they told me I didn't look Irish. I remained silent. It was 2006. I had the job, I was in a relationship, I'd bought a house, and yet I was miserable. And I couldn't understand it. I had all the things that were supposed to make me happy, and yet I was unraveling fast. I couldn't put the TV on or read the newspaper because if I heard or read a story about sexual abuse, it would send me on a spin. And I was deeply ashamed of my sexual identity, and my heart ached for my parents' acceptance. I seriously started thinking about suicide. Every evening, driving home from work, I would battle with myself not to swerve the car onto oncoming traffic. I needed help. I reached out to the services of 1 in 4, an amazing charity that helps survivors of sexual abuse. And with the help of a psychotherapist, I began peeling back the layers of trauma that I had experienced. I remember during the therapeutic process, my throat physically ached because I was bottling up so much. And from there, I went from strength to strength. I reclaimed my job as a journalist. I started presenting a program on News Talk about social justice and mental health. I met this amazing woman, Anne-Marie, and we now have a 2-year-old son that I gave birth to in the week of the marriage referendum. And 14 weeks ago, my wife gave birth to a daughter, Xavier. So we have a 2-year-old and a 14-week-old. It's amazing. I'm out here in clean clothes with no porridge in my hair. It's amazing. And I remember holding my daughter Xavier in my arms and thinking, I felt so contented and blessed in my personal and professional life. And then, on the 8th of September of this year, George Hook, a high-profile radio presenter on the same radio station that I worked in, made some disgusting rape, victim-blaming comments. To be honest with you, I felt like I was 13 again. I was triggered. And my heart went out to the thousands of survivors of sexual abuse and violence across the country because I knew they were deeply affected by those comments as well. I'll never forget that day for as long as I live because I was holding Xavier in my arms and I decided I was going to speak out. This time I chose not to remain silent. And 2 weeks later, my decade-long radio program was cancelled abruptly, despite positive ratings due to scheduling changes. So just to recap, the man who made the disgusting comments about rape still has his job, and the woman who spoke out does not. But here I am. A bit shaky, but still standing. I'm very proud that I spoke up and challenged the system and inspired so many other people to, thank you, to join the global Me Too campaign. So this is what good mental health looks like for me. I was in a vulnerable situation. My wife was and still is on maternity leave. We have 2 young children, and I still decided to speak out and challenge the system. I was willing to risk my career, my livelihood, the respect of my peers, lose my sense of belonging to the radio station that I worked for loyally for the last decade, all because of the belief that I had in myself and the belief in my own resilience was enough to sustain me. But none of this would have been possible if I hadn't spent the last 10 years investing and training my mental health to go the distance through psychotherapy, workshops, retreats, mindfulness, nurturing my spirituality, caring for relationships, working in a job that I love, managing my work-life balance, and of course, most importantly, making time for my family and myself. Although I didn't know it when I was 13 years old, I remained silent because my mental health stopped me from convincing my mother that I was in danger. And now at 44, I can honestly say that my mental health is the best it has ever been. So every time, when I look back in my life, every time I experience racism, homophobia, discrimination, or abuse of power, I didn't speak out because my mental health led me to believe that I couldn't speak out, that I was too afraid, that it wasn't worth it. or that I wasn't worth it. I deserve to live in an inclusive, equal, and compassionate world. A world where all residents can live fuller and more authentic lives. And so do you. So start today. Look after your mental health, invest in it, and train it so you can go the distance. Because not only can you live a fuller life and contribute to the environment, but also be able to cope with whatever life throws at you. And together, we can speak out, challenge the system, and spark positive change. And I'd like to end by quoting Lao Tzu, a Chinese philosopher, the father of the Tao. If you want to awaken all of humanity, you must awaken all of yourself. If you want to eliminate the suffering in the world, then you must eliminate what is dark and negative in yourself. Truly, the greatest gift you have is that of your own self-transformation. I wish you all good mental health. Thank you very much for listening.